Hello. This is chapter 2 of How I Got on My Journey. The title of the chapter is Spiritual Healer. Who, me? If you would have told me 20 years ago, when I was a struggling single mom of 2, that I would one day become a spiritual healer, I would have told you you are crazy. And as far as spiritual beliefs, I would have most likely said, there is no God. Born and baptized a Roman Catholic in Germany, I was raised closer to atheist beliefs, the Big Bang Theory and evolution rather than any religious beliefs. There were always National Geographic books or volumes of natural history and evolution in the house. My father was a manager for Lufthansa, the German airlines, and my mother took the job of raising the 3 children. And we moved to Long Island, New York when I was about 6. Learning some English on the airplane over, and the bulk of it watching Sesame Street in 1st grade. I remember teaching my parents some English, and then by 5th grade tutoring the American kids in my school. Coming from no religious background and a lineage of hardworking Germans, my scientific and left brain way of thinking was rocked when I realized that everything that had happened to me in my life was meant to. Experiences I had as a child came back to me in my late 30s and changed my way of thinking forever. In one day, everything changed. My whole world opened up to possibilities. As a young adult, while visiting my family in Germany, I overheard a conversation about church and state. It was said that in Germany, the church at the time took money out of your paycheck according to your income. It's like having another electric bill, was the sentiment. The more you make, the more you pay. This may have been an exaggeration at a dinner party. However, as a young adult, I perceived this as greed by an organization that is supposed to take care of its people. This perception became my belief. Isn't it amazing how quickly and easily we form beliefs? It was what I perceived to be true. They were my parents, their friends and neighbors. I had no reason to doubt them or even question their statements, even if it was in jest. I know now that beliefs are formed after strong emotion is experienced, strong enough to leave an imprint on your subconscious mind. It had been my parents' opinion at the time that since they did not formally go to church, except for a few occasions, keeping the doors open for his children, they felt forced to declare that they were atheists in order to avoid the heavy payments. Like many of us, they had ill feelings from the messages taught in the local churches. Some things just didn't feel right in their teachings. Then there was also the personal pain my parents carried, the example set by great-grandparents during the pre-war era, with my grandmother being disowned because she fell in love with a man from the other side of the tracks. It was just another example of the good Catholic not practicing what they preach. So needless to say, hearing the stories, I too had religious issues, but it went much deeper than that. I recall entering beautiful cathedrals in Europe. My parents were very worldly and tried to keep us open to the various cultures. However, I never felt good walking into a church and often asked or even begged to stay outside. I felt fearful of the church as a young child. I clung to my mother's hand, half hiding behind her skirt as everyone else admired the amazing architecture. The damp, cold smell that greeted you at the doorway made the hair on my neck stand up and my stomach tighten. Oh, how I hated seeing Jesus on the cross. I couldn't understand why people would choose to see a man in such a suffering manner. If he was alive today, I thought, is this how he would want to be remembered? It didn't feel right to me. I couldn't look at this poor emaciated man with thick nails pounded into him and thorns piercing his head. Yet it wasn't until my late 30s that I realized those feelings many of us experience when it comes to man-made religion are really the body's reaction, telling us that we are veering from what the higher self knows is the truth. Our feelings are our feedback mechanism. a gauge, if you will. The heart, mind, and body are truly connected. Speaking of religion, I can't help but smile and think of a funny label a former employer often used when describing his partner and people struggling with their religious beliefs as recovering Catholics. As a child, I was surrounded by negativity and depression, not so much on the surface, perhaps even on an unconscious level by the others. You could say it was a family trait handed down through the generations. Like many families, my family was able to hide it for the most part, but it was something many suffered with, and it was palpable to a child. It becomes the normal way to be. It becomes our blueprint. Besides having depression in the lineage, there were also ancestral and cultural beliefs we carry. Surviving the wars, for example. I thought to myself, with all the terrible things happening in the world and happening to good people, to innocent people, there can't be a God. It was my belief there is no God. So how did I get from no religious background, almost resenting religion, and becoming a spiritual healer and teacher? Chapter 3. In the beginning. Can you remember as a child playing by yourself, imagining you had little playmates that shared in your adventure? What an imagination, we often say when admiring young children at play. Most of us had imaginary friends. We just forgot as we grew older and became wrapped up in our day-to-day realities. When I was young, I too had an imaginary friend. At least that's what I thought. My childhood friend was an American Indian with long black hair, who most of the time would show himself wearing a single feather, a blue denim shirt, and jeans. On occasion, he would show up wearing war paint. Later, I realized that was when I needed to be tough or brave. I never told anyone about this imaginary friend, not even my family or closest friends. I already felt I was the black sheep of the family. I certainly didn't want to draw any more negative attention to me. Then again, I wasn't sure if I even believed he was real. This could have just been my imagination. My Indian friend would always show up during times I was upset and lonely. There were many times when he would appear and comfort me or play with me. I remember having all my stuffed animals and dolls lined up on the bed, serving them tea, and he would join in and talk to me. He would teach me things, or try to. I recall a few times being a little hard on him and not believing he was real, almost scolding him for trying to make me feel better. At the age of around 11, when I must have been going through some tough times, he had hung around a while trying to console me. I remember saying to him, "Well, since you're here all the time anyway, what's your name?" He replied, "Well, what do you want it to be?" Well, that just annoyed me, and I let him know. He simply laughed. I was expecting some obvious Indian names like Golden Eagle or Running with Deer. Since he was toying with me, and it pissed me off, I decided to give him a name that didn't fit. "Fine, I'll call you Anthony." I figured I'd give him a good old Italian name. I can still see the way he chuckled at me. Little did I know things were happening just as they were supposed to. Later, at the age of about 15, you know, that time we tend to separate from our parents and struggle with non-communication. I was going through a phase where suicide didn't seem like a bad option. I hadn't seen Anthony for a while, but he showed up again during this period. He began to tell me, "It's going to be all right. One day this will all make sense." "Oh yeah? When?" I replied. I wasn't happy now, I thought. He told me that I would understand one day when I was in a relationship with a man who was a quarter American Indian who had a 5-year-old son. I remember at that point the disbelief kicking in because I wasn't planning on having any relationships or even being here. Then he went on to say, It will happen when your offspring is the same age you are now. Offspring, I exclaimed. I'm not bringing any children into this horrible world. He ignored that comment and continued. Your offspring will have your gifts tenfold. What gifts? I thought. Lastly, he said, and by the way, you will name them after me. Wait, what? I exclaimed. Anthony could only laugh at this point. My resistance was dialed to maximum. And that concludes Chapter 3. Thank you for joining me. Talk to you soon.